Serious, Redditors who spend a lot of time working in isolation, research stations etc. What are your creepiest experiences? My uncle works as security at a factory, so he heads home at around 5 AM. Apparently one night he heard loud crashing and banging from around the corner, so he snuck around and quickly peeked. There was nothing there, so he went back to work. About 20 minutes later the loud banging continued, but this time from a desk right in front of him. He looked up just in time to see a lamp slide off and break, and the banging stopped completely. He doesn't know whether there was something there or if the lamp was on a bad angle and slipped off the table. I bartended at a bar in a tiny rural town on weeknights. Needless to say, there were rarely any customers. I worked there for about 7 or 8 months before anything happened. One night I was washing dishes, and I heard someone whistling a tune by the men's bathroom. I turned around because I thought a customer came in. No one was there. For the rest of the night I heard footsteps and whistling. After that night, this happened weekly. I told another bartender who said she heard a man's voice say hello from across the bar when she was the only one there too. I ended up quitting a few months later because I was so freaked out. Used to be a night janitor in a movie theater. We would go in at 4 and clean until the doors opened at 11. To save time and our jobs, we would sometimes come in around the time the last movies were finishing and just sleep in one of the empty theaters, making sure we would be there when the shift started. Our basic MO was to use electric leaf blowers up and down the aisles of each theater, blowing popcorn and trash all the way to the bottom, then cleaning the seats up manually for anything gross or larger debris. This was expedient, but it was very loud, so it was easy to lose yourself in the work. Of course, the lights were on in the theaters to better assist in the cleaning, and usually we were the only ones there at the time, so whenever something strange happened we would chalk it up to the other guy. There was one standing rule though, that we all followed to the letter: no one in the projection booth. There was no reason to go up there. We didn't clean it. All our supplies were downstairs, and most of all, it was haunted. There is a phenomenon that happens with theaters and projection booths. No matter what, you always feel like you're being watched. When you're walking around deaf from the sound of the blowers in an empty movie theater, and you happen to glance up at the booth, and there is unmistakably someone standing there watching you, you will crap your pants. Especially when you go out into the hallway and find the other guy in his theater working. Especially when you and he go to either end of the building, to the 2 exits of the booth, and trap whoever it was up there and there is no one there. We just chose not to frick with it. I'm a janitor who cleans after hours at a few largish locations. It would really freak me out when I would come in and the alarms weren't turned on. I get paranoid that some druggie is around the corner. Not really much of a story, but it is inspiring me to make a video game out of it. Condemned. Criminal Origins has a lot of druggies around corners in warehouses and old offices. Worked overnights in a gas station for a summer and it was my responsibility to restock the fridges. We had a garage as part of the building, as well as a car wash. The stock room was across the shop and in the back of it was the side entrance door to the car wash. It was a quiet night and I was carrying an ambitious amount of inventory by hand. As soon as I set foot in the shop, I got the chills and the hair on the back of my neck rose. I knew that logically I was safe and that there was nobody there, but it felt like someone was walking on my heels. Another time, I was in the cashier's booth with the steel door leading to the shop closed. There was a tiny window on the door and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young boy walk out the garage door. The overhead door was obviously closed and the path he was going definitely led out there. My dad worked at the haunted Toys R Us in Sunnyvale, CA. He worked as a night watchman back in the day to pay for school. Cool gig. Got to sit around and study while being paid for doing next to nothing. Learned to juggle and play guitar too. Weird stuff happened there all the time. Objects would fall off shelves as you walked past them. Lights flickered on and off from time to time. Noises from the other side of the hall. Stuff like that. So there he was in a big mostly dark store, all by himself, thinking about the ghost. He said out loud, "If there is a ghost here, then that balloon, the red one in the middle of the roof, will pop." Right as he finished the sentence, the balloon burst. Suffice to say he turned on all the lights in the building and got as close to a door as he could for the rest of the shift. Never trust an isolated red balloon. Worked in wildland firefighting for a bit and we camped out when we were out working on anything. Most of what we did wasn't actually on active fires but more just mitigation and stuff. Anyway, we slept in tents every night in some pretty isolated areas. One morning we all woke up and pretty much everyone said it sounded like some animal was walking near our tents and brushing against them. One guy went to take a poop and came back and told us there was a very fresh deer carcass right near our camp. We all took a look and it looked like it had been killed last night by a mountain lion. Suffice to say we all brought knives or whatever we had with us if we had to pee at night. Not that it would help much against a murder kitty. I work in a liquor store. I do closing shifts alone for several hours in the shop until 10:30 or so. I'll regularly be in the cooler and hear footsteps in there with me. That's pretty much nightly. Also one time I was counting down my till well after closing and heard a bottle clank somewhere in the store. Walked over and found a bottle of wine standing upright on the floor in the middle of the aisle. I had just done my nightly walk through to make sure all shelves were in order. I had also just mopped the floor. The tiles were still wet without a single footprint leading up to or away from the bottle. I logged into the CCTV system and started looking back through the past 30 minutes for that particular aisle. Nothing. At one point that particular camera just blipped out and when it came back the bottle was there. Fuck that noise. I inspected an old abandoned hospital several times and would talk to my security guard escort about his experiences. This place could be the set of The Walking Dead. It's extremely creepy. There is stuff scattered all over the floors, missing ceiling tiles, and only every fourth light or so is on in the hallways. As we walked the building we could hear doors slam and other loud noises coming from the other floors. He said he caught heads in there all the time. He told me his creepiest experience was seeing a child running on the 4th floor from the lobby area. He searched the entire building but couldn't find anyone inside, even though there is only one unsealed entrance. This apparently has occurred several times but he told me he still doesn't believe in ghosts. The guards have to walk this hospital every night armed only with mace. I, gladly, have never gone back, although I drive my son by it sometimes to freak him out. Parenting at its best. Here's what happens if you don't clean your room, little Johnny. Okay, late to the party but still want to share for my fellow night shifters. This isn't particularly extreme but still gives me the chills. I used to work as a pharmacy tech overnight at a hospital. My job was to deliver meds to all parts of the hospitals to machines that nurses use, like vending machines but for meds. I hated it. The parts where I was mostly alone were the surgery areas where there was no one really around and the lights are dimmed. I would always wear headphones to keep me sane because of how quiet it was and every little noise made me jump. One night, I pushed my cart into an empty, dimmed lighted room as usual. As I went to punch in my password to access the machine, in the reflection of the machine window, I saw a figure of a woman walking in the room. I spun around so fast but saw no one there. I didn't hear footsteps. I paused my music, and I held my breath to make sure I could hear fine. Nothing. I turned back around and tried to fill the machine as quickly as I did and gunned it out of there. I avoided looking into windows or mirrors that whole week. I guess I'm a big scaredy cat but hospitals at night freak me out. The amount of people that die there just remind me that it can truly be haunted. I was once on a solo assignment to safely prepare computers in an abandoned medical lab to be destroyed sold. So I had to gather all hard drive storage devices and secure them for shredding. The lab had been closed during business hours, with patients there, blood tests running, etc. So there was still blood in centrifuges, needles that didn't make it in the sharps box, etc. I was alone in the building, and had been told there was no power, but there was running water. I needed a drink so I started walking through the dark hallways, trying to find a sink. As I neared the bathrooms, one of toilets flushed. I bolted back to the warehouse room I'd been working in, which had an exit. I was sure there was someone living or squatting inside of the building, and called my sister, who happened to be our client contact for this project. She laughed pretty hard first, then said she did the same thing when she first went there. Apparently one of the toilets runs constantly, and when it fills up too much it flushes. A bit later I got another scare when a door slammed, but that was because the power was on, and the AC kicked in, sucking the door closed. It didn't help that the place was 3.5 hours away, in the middle of a cornfield with nothing else around, and I'd been awake since 3 AM to make it up there in time. To get into the building I also had to step over dead birds that I'd imagine had flown into the windows. I was in college. My senior year I was student teaching, so I stayed on campus during the college spring break. Since the high school was still in, we had some international students who stayed on campus during the break in my area, so I volunteered to sit office hours and do rounds each night. There were 4 dorms in my area, and the one building only had 1 student on the first floor. I did my first rounds at 8, and went to do my second rounds at 10 PM, on the 3rd floor of the building. On my second rounds, someone had gone to every door and colored in the whiteboards posted on every door. Black marker, solid, parallel lines, each board methodically filled in. It would have taken hours, and I know that they weren't colored in when I did rounds at 8. I had heard stories about that building. Light switches randomly flicking off, people seeing faces reflected on windows, that sort of stuff. I decided to skip doing rounds on that floor the rest of the week. A co-worker and I were doing some routine maintenance and inspections at an electrical substation. This facility is in the middle of the desert, about 30 miles out of town and 10 miles from the nearest main road. We were the only ones there, no other vehicles parked outside. We go through 2 locked gates and 2 locked doors to get to the breakers we need to test. When we enter the room we will be working in, we hear frantic whispering above the hum of the equipment. Not a conversation but a single intelligible voice. The whispers go silent as I step into the room. My co-worker and I glance at each other without a word and quietly and cautiously sweep the room. This is an area that gets frequent illegal immigrant traffic, but I had no idea how or why they gained access to this building. We searched every inch of that room but didn't find a trace of human activity aside from our own. We performed our tasks and left, sharing very few words. Once we were finished and back in the truck, my buddy confirmed that I had heard a voice as well. We haven't spoken about it since. Used to be a traveling manger for a very small chain of gas stations. They're all in very rural areas. I used to dread going to one in the absolute middle of nowhere, mainly because I was by myself and people would come in absolutely wasted. I was too afraid not to sell them alcohol, and the cops were 30 minutes away at the very least. It was about 3:30 AM, and one of our regular drunks drove his current girlfriend's car while wasted to the store while I was on shift. He insisted I go out with him. When I said no, he lost it and started screaming I was a lesbian. And what does that do for me? I just shook my head in disbelief. Then he started screaming that he had been molested as a child and I could help him get over that, or I would just have sex with him. I did my best to calm him down, and he left. I locked up, called the cops, and the usual manager and told her I was leaving as soon as the cops showed up. It was a 30-ish minute wait for cops, and the whole time I thought he kept driving around the store. It was building built in the 1950s, so every little noise made me jump. I finally called my friend who owned a gun store in the next town over to come wait with me. I had to call 911 again to tell them I thought the guy was circling the store. My friend on his way wasn't the culprit, and he was armed. The cops showed up about 10 minutes later. It was so frustrating. All they said was if it happens again to give them a call. I quit that weekend. The regular manager told me that she's lost other female workers because of the drunks at that location, but this guy took the cake. Holy crap. As a woman who worked the graveyard shift alone at a gas station, I can empathize. Had to deal with a lot of creeps. Luckily for me, the cops were much closer. That came in handy when a guy walked in, wandered around to pick out a snack, fixed himself a fountain drink and paid, all with his dong hanging out of his pants. I don't really work in isolation, but most nights by the time I leave work, it's pretty late and there are very few people left around. I usually leave by myself. One night I got into the elevator alone and pressed a button for the ground floor. The elevator stopped at the ground floor but the doors didn't open. Then it went to the top floor. It just started going back and forth between the top floor and the ground floor without ever stopping to open the doors. I clicked the alarm button in the elevator and got on the line with security. They were sympathetic, but the only solution they could offer was to just keep trying different floors until the elevator stopped. So that's what I did. But I had no luck until I tried the second floor. In my building, the second floor is famous for how creepy it is. The elevator area is the only area that looks finished. The rest appears to be under construction yet completely abandoned at the same time. The elevator area has dark, blood red walls and very dim lighting. This is the only lighting on the entire floor. Even when the elevators aren't going completely haywire, they'll stop on the second floor and open the doors every now and then without any explanation. It's been that way for the last 3 years I've worked there, at the very least. So, of course, it's only fitting that my runaway elevator would finally stop and let me out on this creepy butt floor. Security told me to just wait there for them to come get me. During that crazy elevator ride, I kept thinking this is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but I was wrong. Those long agonizing minutes of standing there, alone, on the second floor, squinting into the dark corners of that evil place were the most terrifying moments of my life. The elevators still inexplicably stop on that floor from time to time. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but if I did, I'd say there's something on that floor that wants to get to people. I had a part-time night job doing medical transcription in a small office in a very large building in an iffy part of town. There was a group of women in an office across the hall. I kept my office door shut to avoid them popping in and startling me while I had my headphones on and was engrossed in my work. Well, if I happened to work a little later than usual and they were leaving, they would turn off all the lights, not realizing I was still there until they would see my car in the lot. Super creepy having to walk a good length to get out of the building with only a couple of small red emergency lights to guide the way. BTW, I always wondered why one of them couldn't walk back in and turn on the lights once they saw that I was still there. I'm a bit late, but the school I used to go to was really old, 1500s. Back then the students had to wear these long robes and one day a boy's robe got caught on fire from the fireplace and he was sadly burned to death. The old part of the school, specifically the attic where he died, has had some really creepy stuff go on at night when teachers are working up there alone. One teacher, who's the strict Irish man, now refuses to even go to the old part of the school after a night working there. He said the lights started acting up and he heard weird noises coming from the floor below despite the fact he was the only person in the school to his knowledge. He then heard a rattle on a nearby window. He went to look out the window and he swears blind he saw the face of a boy on the other side looking back at him. He packed up his stuff, rushed out the school, and hasn't been back to the old part since. Another teacher, who also said she heard footsteps from the floor below and said the lights started acting weird when working up there at night, has a photo of some ghostly human-shaped shadow standing in the doorway to the attic looking in at her on her phone. She called a fellow teacher who lived nearby to come and check it out because she was too scared. No one else was meant to be in the old part of the school and the other teacher found nothing. I used to work at a tourist attraction where a TV show was filmed. For part of the time I worked there I was the housekeeper. I had to clean up after daily tours and prepare the house for parties or overnight guests. Even though I know of nothing bad happening there, everyone told me it was haunted. Turn out all the lights only to get to the end of the driveway and have all the lights on, etc. So as I am cleaning on a regular basis I hear footsteps in other rooms, especially upstairs. I was freaked out but I had a job to do. I just started talking to them. Hey look, we've got a dinner party for 40. 2 couples are spending the night. I have to get this done. Sometimes the living room lights would go on and off like they acknowledged what I said and usually that would be the end of the noises. In a way I felt like we were cool. I have no idea if they did anything to the people who slept there. Didn't really interact with people that would have that feedback. My boss lived on property and he'd sneak up on me when I was vacuuming. Laugh that he scared me and then ask why I didn't carry a gun working alone at night. Because you'd be dead fool. You're the only one bugging me. He lived too far to walk so always drove his truck. Before I'd think there were ghosts I'd make sure his truck wasn't there. Besides I think shooting at already dead people is probably pretty pointless. He got too much joy out of scaring me. He'd usually been drinking, so he would have told me if it had been him. He was never that slick anyway. I will say I was quite happy when I got promoted. When I was in grad school I would work weekends at a care center for mentally ill and significantly developmentally disabled people. The care center was an extremely old building. It used to be a hotel and had been a creamery in the late 1800s. It's still listed as a local haunted hotspot. Supposedly a young girl died there in an accident when it was a creamery. On weekends one of my jobs was to inventory the belongings of residents in the storage area, which happened to be deep in the basement of the building. To crank up the creepy factor further, the storage room required a key to get out, meaning you could be locked in what was essentially a dungeon with no cell reception. I found the only way to deal with this was to listen to CCR at all times while I was down there. The downside was I couldn't hear if any ghosts were sneaking up behind me, but the pros outweighed the cons. I am the one who caused the creepy experience. I once was at my college after hours, and no one ever stays after hours. I was studying in one of the classrooms when I heard doors opening and closing. I went out of the classroom to find a security guard playing with his phone while walking and making sure classroom lights were closed. He was just 2 classrooms away. I waited outside the class ready to beg him to allow me to finish studying. My only concern was him throwing me out, as I had a lot to cover. As he passed I said hi and got ready to beg. The guy raised his eyes off his phone, turned blue as if he had seen a ghost and chose to believe that I was not real. He then started praying, got his arm into the room as I stepped aside, closed the lights. Then he immediately freaks out and runs away. I returned to the classroom and continued studying while being uneasy, but continued to my usual schedule. I worked alone at a small power plant in the middle of nowhere. It's just me, no one else, for dozens of miles. The nearest town is over an hour drive. Anyways, late at night, like 11 PM or so, I need to relieve myself, so I go into the attached bathroom. I hear a noise, but at night you always hear things and just assume it's an auditory hallucination. Anyways, I leave the restroom and no crap, there's a man just staring at me on the other side of the control room. He's between me and the exit door. He's very disheveled looking and just standing there, not saying a word. Now, I was in the military and spent some time as a security contractor in Iraq. I know how to throw down in an excessively violent manner if need be. That said, I know how guns work and how I'm at a disadvantage. Basically, this guy was a homeless man that had walked out to my plant and wanted some food or a job for money. I gave him my sandwich and told him he had to go though. I let him stay in the heated shack outside the fence and called the sheriff. They showed up after about an hour and a half and picked him up. I was working in the villages of Malawi, Africa, and came to one community very isolated and remote. The children stopped going to school BC. These guys were terrorizing them. They were witch doctors and if caught they'd take the kids into the cemetery and do crazy things. They also terrorized the widows and others in the community. When they told me the story, I thought they might be exaggerating a bit. I didn't ever feel scared when I was in the villages, and since they are cut off from technology, I thought maybe it was just a bit of folklore passed away to create fear. Then one day I was sitting on a banana fibers mat with a widow and drinking tea. I couldn't speak the tribal language, so we just smiled and drank together in silence and peace. All of a sudden I heard like this grunting sound. An electric bolt of fear crept down my body. I can't even explain how intense this fear was. It's like I just froze and couldn't even turn around. I just felt evil and darkness around me. Anyway, these witch doctors surrounded us for a while and just grunted and hissed and made these animal noises. We didn't move an inch. We never turned around. They were so close and literally right behind us. And all I could think the entire time was I'd feel a spear in my neck any second. After a while they left and eventually my transportation arrived. A few other Americans were in other villages and came for my pickup. I remember once I got in the car I couldn't even speak for a while what had happened. My words and stories don't do justice to what I felt that day. I never knew darkness like that existed, but it does. I bet Kurtz sent them. Nowhere near as isolated of an employment opportunity, but it happened when the store was closed for the evening. Worked at a Goodwill in AZ when I was 17. Came in at 7 to start my shift, only to be greeted by a bunch of police cars. Asked what was going on to one of the assistant managers. Dude was cool, always helped us young employees get booze or smokes. He showed me the security footage of a baby grand piano that was donated a few days earlier, straight up sliding 6 feet out of nowhere, setting off all the motion sensors. It was pretty nuts. I worked as a lab associate through college at a very old university hospital. A few of my rats were housed far away from my lab in the old part of the hospital that happened to be next to the morgue. More than once I swear I saw something go around a corner and all I had as backup was a small army of rats. I never chased and learned to be as efficient as possible at night in the winter when no one was down there but myself. I worked in fast food when I was in school. Every employee had a story about the ghost. Here's mine. We were closing up and the only people left in the restaurant was my boss and I. We were heading out the back door when I realized I forgot to clock out. She waited by the back door while I walked up front to the register. While I was up there I started joking about the ghost because I knew she was easily spooked by paranormal stuff. I was just saying dumb crap like if you're here show yourself or please speak so we know you exist or something along those lines. Anyway, the second I say that I hear this rustling noise coming from the dining room and getting louder and closer. It sounded like someone running full speed in baggy clothing. I didn't wait around. I booked it out of there as fast as I could, even having seen what I believe is a paranormal entity on a different occasion. This is the encounter that spooks me the most. I was working once at a security guard for a private firm. I was guarding a small building, only one floor, a fence gate and a small garden. It was only 5 rooms, a main lobby, an office, and a few other storage rooms as well as a basement. I was always on duty alone at this place due to its size. I was in the lobby one night as always on my laptop doing nothing, expecting nothing. I hear a knock at the lobby doors. I head to the door and find no one, like at all. The gate is shut and locked up tight. I check around and head back to the desk. Soon after I hear the door to the office behind me open. I of course grab my light and my gun and head to the door. It's open but no one is inside. Feeling a little freaked out I sit back down and rather than get on my laptop I close it and put it away. I sat silent in the dark, the only light I see from the street, and listened. The rain pouring out, hitting the glass, doors and roof. I hear footsteps and find no one. I hear knocking and stay put. Finally I hear breathing right behind me. I get up and do a quick 180 expecting to see someone. Nothing. I sat for hours terrified, hearing all kinds of noises and sounds, even feeling someone touch me at one point. 6 AM hits and I was out. I quit that job. I talked to my boss about it. He told me I wasn't the first to have that happen and that it was probably Zach. I asked who Zach was. He told me he didn't know. That was just what the first guide to quit called it. This isn't particularly extreme, but my office is in a basement, far away from everyone else's offices, and I can go most of the day without seeing anyone else unless I leave to get some food. It used to be a photography lab, so despite being in a basement, the ventilation is intentionally very good. So good in fact that on many days, the office is filled with the loud, overlapping low-frequency drones of the fans in the air conditioning system all day. I've never seen anything particularly creepy, other than bugs, but I've heard plenty of sounds that are exactly what you'd expect to hear from a video game trying to scare you. Exact replicas of Minecraft darkness noises, skitterings and distant rumblings that are artifacts of things happening in the pipes and other people moving in floors above. Nothing extreme, but it can lend itself to a sense of paranoia after a few hours. Hopefully not too late to the party. In high school I used to work at a sandwich shop that was within an old university. The layout of the store was different from most stores and we had a huge back room with a small office and several large coolers, 2 of which were non-functional. My co-workers and I experienced so many strange things there. Door slamming, strange noises, apparitions, you name it. I personally had a few experiences. The 2 scariest I can think of. One, since we were closed on Sundays, I was tasked with going to the store and prepping all of the food for the following day. So I'd go for a couple hours, completely alone, and prep things. On one particular occasion, the air felt different and I was immediately uncomfortable. I normally was able to be in and out with no issues, but this time was different. I tried to finish things as soon as I could, but as I was about to leave I saw this black humanoid figure lunging at me from one of the furthest back rooms. I freaked out and flinched. Strangest thing is that I felt a surge of ice cold air hitting me on the face as the creature would have hit me. I didn't finish prep and just left. 2. I was one of the first people, along with my manager, to arrive that morning. I lost track of him while finishing prepping food. At one point, I walked by the small office the manager would often hang out and which was only accessible with a key. Since money was kept there, I could swear I saw him, or something, sitting on the desk, but immediately after seeing him in the office he walked in from the front of the store. Confused, I walked to the office and it was empty. He couldn't have walked in and out of the office since I would have heard him as I was standing right there. He also had the only key. We eventually started calling the ghost Stan. I never did feel fully comfortable there though. Once my parents went out of town for the weekend and left me alone to take care of the dog and the house. It was really late at night and I was downstairs watching TV when all of a sudden I started hearing violent knocking coming from this closet door in the hallway as if someone was trapped. My dog started barking at the door, but when I opened it there was nobody there. It really creeped me out. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.